Marble, North Carolina. Granny Donaldson never has been to Italy, but she and the peasant women of the Po Valley are linked together by a rare folk art that was old when Columbus was a weaver's helper. Out of the genius of their hands and their imaginations, they fashion quaint tapestries of a sort whose symbolic figures proclaim the spirit of life. They are among the most unusual tapestries in all the world, and there is something about them that suggests a kinship to the pictographs of ancient Egypt. They were created originally to deck the backs of Italian cows on certain festival days, a custom practiced still in Italy, and one that probably grew out of the cow cult among the Greco-Roman peoples almost 2,000 years ago. But Granny Donaldson never had heard of the cow blanket with its decorations of crocheted flowers and animals, when in a moment of strange inspiration she conceived and made the first one back in 1920. "I can't rightly tell you how I come to make the first one," she said. "Nobody taught me, nor showed me. I never got the idea from anybody, and I never copied one for the good reason I'd never seen one, much less heard tell of one." She slowly shook her head, this mountain woman of 86, who can't quite understand all the stir she has created in folk art circles, whose critics have described her creations as reflecting a delightfully refreshing spirit. "Of course," she said, "you'll hear all kinds of stories about how I got started making what they've come to call cow blankets, but which I never have given a name except crocheted pieces. Maybe you've already heard them." "Law me, such stories, like how I seen one of them cow blankets fetched over from Italy and run straight home to copy it. They said I was in such a hurry to get to my crochet needles, I never bothered to take the path but ran straight across the field. Or how I made one for my cow named Bessie and hung it on her and kept her tied out where everybody could see her a-wearing it. Ain't none of 'em true. I never had a cow when I set out to make these pieces, and I never owned one named Bessie. Even if I'd had a cow, wasn't nothing to my mind that called for fitting a blanket to her, especially one all crocheted with flowers and animals. Folks would have thought I was plumb crazy. But them stories got around, spread like wildfire, they did. Folks from away would stop by and want to see Bessie and her cow blanket. Some of 'em acted like they was real put out when I told them there wasn't no cow and no cow blanket. Reckon they thought I wasn't being sociable." For a moment she rocked in her chair there by the fire in the living room of her daughter's home, her thin hands smoothing the folds of her dress. "Now I'll tell you how it was I come to make what they all call a cow blanket," she said. "I was living over on Brasstown Creek. A neighbor woman stopped by to feed her baby. When she left, she forgot the baby's blanket, and that started it. Well, I noticed the blanket, a little thing it was, and I picked it up and sat there in the chair with it. First thing you know, I was a-rockin' and a-thinkin', and all at once it come to me that it'd be right pretty if I crocheted some chickens and cows and birds and mules and flowers and fixed them on the blanket. So I got out my needles and some wool thread and started. I made 'em just as I went along. Didn't have no pattern or nothing to go by, just imagined them. About the time I got it all finished, Miss Louise Pittman came by. She's connected with the Southern Highlands Handicraft Guild. I'd been doing some scarves and things for her. Well, she saw that blanket and she wanted it right away. Took a fit over it, she did. Miss Pittman put me to work making 'em. That was a long time ago, about 35 years. Since then I've made hundreds, and they tell me they've gone all over the world. I can still make the figures, but since I've got so old, I can't do no good in sewing 'em on. My daughter here helps me now. She sews them on." What I read was a portion of a piece written by John Paris. John Paris wrote for the Asheville Citizen-Times for many years. He had a column called Roaming the Mountains, and he'd go all over western North Carolina, collecting stories, interviewing people, documenting the old ways of doing things. And over the years, he took those articles and he put them in books. So if you're lucky, you might do a quick Google. His name was John Paris and find one of his books. I've always found it really interesting that when I'm researching Appalachia, the culture and heritage, his name rarely comes up as someone that has documented the area, even though he did for many, many years. I guess I'm lucky that I know about him since I live here in western North Carolina. I really like the piece about Granny Donaldson for a variety of reasons. For one thing, she was from my county right here where I live, just up the road. Marble, North Carolina is just up the road from Brasstown. Then, of course, when she talks about making that first crocheted piece, she lived on Brasstown Creek, so that was in Brasstown. If you ever visit the John C. Campbell Folk School, you can go to their History Center and you can see one of Granny Donaldson's blankets. It's beautiful. It's really pretty. And Louise Pittman, that's mentioned in the article, she worked for the folk school, so there's the connection between the two. And I'm sure that Miss Pittman, because she worked at the folk school, she was very familiar with craft and the value behind craft, and that's probably why she got so excited when she seen what Granny Donaldson had created. Granny Donaldson also reminds me of Granny, of my mother, that I call Granny a lot. Granny's the queen of crochet. She's always making something. If she's not putting up green beans right now, I guarantee you she's sitting in her chair crocheting. Over the years, she's made all kinds of stuff, but I do remember when the grandkids were little that she made one blanket, maybe more than one, but I remember one that did have little crocheted ducks all the way around that she had appliqued on. So it wasn't a cow blanket, it was a baby blanket, but still kind of the same ideal there. But mostly I like the creativity that Granny Donaldson showed. She sat in that chair a-thinking and a-rocking and decided how that little blanket would be right pretty if it had some flowers and some mules and some cows on it. And I'm sure she thought too how that would please the neighbor lady when she come back to get it. And I'm sure it did. I bet she was tickled to death when she seen what Granny Donaldson had done to her baby's blanket. The story reminded me of Granny in a different way, reminded me of a story of one time something that Granny did to spruce up hers and Pap's bathroom. Pap built our house, and their little bathroom, it was just a half bath. You could barely stand at the sink and sit on the potty at the same time. It was so small, and they didn't even have a door. They just had a curtain over it. But it was built kind of behind the basement stairwell where the basement steps went down. So the sink actually went out over the steps, kind of, is how Pat built it. And it was really tall sink. I couldn't reach the handles to turn the water on when I was real young. But anyway, back behind that sink, there was just like a little alcove. That was the wall, was just that really the width of the hallway there. And Granny and Pap had put some mirrors. They took 4 mirrors and put up there, glued up there, and that was just what was on that wall. But Granny got to thinking and studying, and maybe even a rocking like Granny Donaldson, because we always had a rocking chair. And she decided, wouldn't those mirrors be pretty if they had flowers painted on them? Well, the only thing was, Granny didn't know how to paint. She couldn't paint flowers. But it was in the summer, and her and Pap always grew a big garden. They always had a garden. And so she got a pot of ochre. I don't know how she thought about it or how she come up with it, but she cut the ochre in half, and then she used the end of the ochre with the half cut as like a stamp. And she stamped it, put it in orange paint, and then she went all around those mirrors and made little orange flowers all the way around with that pot of ochre. She thought that was the best thing ever. And I thought it was beautiful too. It's just a good memory that I have of Granny being creative. She's creative in a lot of ways. But I think that need to be creative is an Appalachian trait. Women and men, they get to thinking and studying and maybe even rocking like Granny Donaldson. And they figure out how to make something of beauty that just enriches their lives. It may not even be anything special, no more special than those little orange flowers around Granny's mirror that nobody was really ever going to see but her and Pap and maybe one of the kids, but it made her life better. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll subscribe to my channel, and I hope you drop back by often as I celebrate Appalachia.